What's up, guys? Welcome back to Roensch Capital Charts. Today we're taking a look at Nvidia stock, ticker symbol NVDA, on a variety of time frames in anticipation of the next trading day, Thursday, February 29th. Nvidia stock today down about $10.38 a share, 1.32%. Let's take a look here. You know, the stock is down a couple of points after hours. Listen, if you're new here, get used to me saying this. Take it with a grain of salt. I don't care if it's in your favor. I don't care if you're short and you're looking for any reason to confirm your bias, or if you're long and you're beating yourself up about it. Volume is so low. All right, the real test is going to be the open tomorrow. But let's quickly look on the 1 minute chart here. I just want to point out something to you guys. You guys know I'm a scalp trader. It's what I do every day. I'm a scalper at heart, really. So I just briefly like to take a look at the 1 minute chart to look at any, revenue generating opportunities that we could potentially look to repeat tomorrow here on Nvidia, because it's a stock that I'm constantly watching. Now, Nvidia is actually one that I alerted today to the group as a potential scalp setup here. I was looking at this repeat offender setup. I mean, just almost textbook. Just slight overextension early, slight overextension. But listen, if you're looking for perfect, you're never going to take any trades. But I'm looking for as close to perfect as possible. And if there are any issues, like, for me, it's too sloppy compared to what I've collected my data on over the years. The channel's tightening down. In this case, the channel was very wide. That was not a problem. And any overextension or early bounces, I guess you could say, was well within my risk parameters. And I know that over years of collecting data on this setup. And just a beautiful setup, one that, for me, has edge over the long run. Just so you guys know what I'm kind of looking for here on Nvidia. This also works to the short side. Today happened to be, of course, to the long side. So let's move on now. Let's get away from the intraday mentality and start going through our daily ritual, so to speak. So this is the volume profile on the 5 minute chart. I think it's the best chart to look at the volume profile on because it beefs up the volume of each candle compared to the 1 minute, but you're still getting the little wiggles, and it's really obvious. You can tell when moves need to be looked at in terms of the volume profile on those moves. So I think the 5 minutes kind of like the sweet spot to get this data. And I got to be honest with you guys, I'm really only interested in one move here. Well, a combination of moves. This upside push and then fade. I'm curious to see if we got any volume variation. And, we actually did. We saw, it was a little bit like gappy in terms of you had higher volume candles and then lower volume and then higher and then lower. But overall in this region, while that move was happening, we saw what I think is worthwhile to mention, volume changes. Okay, and you compare that to the open, it was actually relatively substantial. Now, on the fade away from that move, and this is really what makes this important in my head. If we saw the same thing over here during this fade, it would be a wash, but we didn't. We saw actually a consistent fade off in volume during the fade back. And then, of course, the consolidation as well. Which is interesting to me, because although we did see the stock kind of fade back into the close and give up the majority of that move, when you start comparing volume, I have to consider, okay, well, it seemed in that moment the majority or a bigger sample size in the market agreed that Nvidia belonged higher. But of course, the price is the price, so it's one factor of many, and the reality is it did fade back down. However, I'm still considering that volume profile on that move and just kind of taking that and saying, okay, that was interesting here today. Now, on to the 30 minute chart. Let's start looking at levels that I'm paying attention to tomorrow. So this is really clear. I'm going to highlight 4 days here. You can see that we've seen the 50 period is very much so in play on Nvidia. Support level, and then we gave it up. And this day it was kind of both sides of the ball, but that's when we started claiming this as a resistance late on the 26th. Then it was resistance basically all day yesterday. And the same thing here today. Now, what changed today compared to yesterday? If you guys watched the video yesterday, I'm covering Nvidia stock every day. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to get to 3,000 by the end of this week. I hope we can get there. I think we can absolutely do that, but it's not going to happen without your help. So if you're getting value here, please jump on board. I greatly appreciate it. We have the 200 period now squeezing up and creating this tight little channel. So I would say, I would be surprised if, we're covering this tomorrow and I'm still telling you guys the same story that we're in a channel. We'll see what ends up being the case. However, Nvidia is likely to pick a side here tomorrow, I would think. Okay, just based on its ATR, because these two are tightening down, and I would imagine they're going to get even tighter as we head into tomorrow. So bulls, I mean, this should come as a rather obvious statement, but this has been treated as such a resistance lately. And the fact that the 50 period is descending, we need to claim that, which likely tomorrow is going to require Nvidia getting above 780 if we're kind of like, kind of like leading the runner, so to speak, right? 782, it's coming down. It'll likely be around 780 here tomorrow. So listen, if I'm a bull, I want to see that reclaim and I want to see it get above there, ideally on as much volume as possible to kind of stop this descending pattern that, listen, I'm sure the bears are looking at this and they're like, I want that resistance to hold. And absolutely, if you're a bear, you want this 50 period to continue more aggressively curling downside and to hold up as a resistance, but that's going to require you to break downside through the 200 period probably tomorrow if you're a bear, okay? And this is all on the 30-minute chart, of course. Let's move on to the 4-hour chart and take a look. You can see here that this 50 period on the 4-hour is becoming more and more relevant, currently sitting at approximately 753, 753.50, right in that range. I mean, listen, bulls, it's good that it's coming up quicker than the stock is falling. I do like that because, we're not really meeting in the middle. It's kind of meeting the stock a little bit higher than the middle. So ideally, as a bull, we wouldn't necessarily want to see a test of that. If we do, though, it's good. It's above 750 now. I like that about the 50 period here on the 4-hour, but we're going to obviously want to see a hold of the 50 period rather than having to break downside through that and test 750. Bears, obviously, your near-term goal is to crack 750 to the downside, but you just understand now you're going to have to go through not only 750, which is a psychological level, but also the 50 period now here on the 4-hour, which potentially can beef up the strength needed to crack that to the downside. Just be aware. Now, the most important chart of all, which is the daily. This paints the most clear picture and I think the most important picture that we could possibly look at here. There's nothing around, right? I mean, the 50-day moving average is just cracking $600 a share here, basically today, if not just barely yesterday. So I think we find ourselves in a relatively obvious place, right? Kind of a little bit of a channel. And when things are obvious, again, do not overcomplicate them. There's no need to. You want the obvious story because it's the most thought about and looked at story and the story that the most decisions are going to be made around. And we're right around 776, right? Kind of 775 region. I mean, that puts us right between 750, which is a psychological level that has also acted as a technical level now, and 800, which is undoubtedly a psychological level as we push toward that all-time high of around 824. Personally, I don't think either side here can declare victory until they claim the important psychological / technical level. For bears, it's 750. It's very obvious. For bulls, we're going a little bit more on, faith that 800 is going to be a psychological level. I think that's relatively obvious, though. But now that we've locked in the all-time high above 8, and we've proved that we can rip up through there, we did so on a single day. Now 825 gets thrown in the mix. So bulls, it's a little bit more complicated for bulls, I think, but that doesn't necessarily mean more difficult. There's just a little bit more to think about. A crack of 8, a hold of 8, and use 8 as kind of the trampoline necessary to get some momentum to just bust through 824, 825 region, head up toward 850, I think is kind of like the short-term goal, or like the shorter to more mid-term goal. Bears, it's really simple. Any test of 8, obviously we don't want to give up 8 at all. Because once you start getting up toward all-time high, likely the position is going a little bit more against you than you anticipated. Because the goal really is to crack 750 to the downside, which I think a lot of bears would look at and say, okay, this opens up a little bit of a move, potentially down towards 7. A big mistake that I think a lot of traders, early on especially, are guilty of is only thinking through their own side's psychology. I like to think through the other side's psychology, arguably more than my own. When you understand how the enemy, so to speak, to be dramatic, is thinking here, I think it helps you understand your own position that much more thoroughly. Okay. Now, what was the options bias here today on Nvidia? 991,000 total contracts traded, 607,000 calls, 384,000 puts. A heavy call side bias here on Nvidia today. The short-term speculators, that 0 to 20 delta range as well, we're seeing a call side bias just under 250,000 calls traded and about 184,000 puts. And again here today, look at this, every single delta range. So that's going to include out of the money, at the money, and in the money, and everything in between. which if you start taking the averages of the expirations traded at those deltas, you're going to see kind of like a short-term sentiment, a more mid-term sentiment, and then on average, a longer-term sentiment. All of it's leaning to the call side, which of course helps beef up that overall call bias on the call put ratio. But listen, as always, everything here, the options chain included, is simply one factor of many. So you can't, take this as the only factor just because it supports it confirms your bias, right? It supports your thesis. That's a huge mistake. I know it feels good to do that, and it doesn't feel good to look at the other side. But I mean, listen, do you want to be a trader or not? So with that in mind, at the end of the day, though, that's what the options traders are telling us here today. They're call heavy today in their volume. Listen, if you got value out of this video, please subscribe to the channel. Again, trying to hit 3,000 by the end of the week. I think we can do it as long as you guys are, getting value and looking to keep getting these videos. And by the way, just recently, as part of every single membership at the link in the pinned comment, I'm now including in-play stock alerts, which is essentially think about it as like a scanner for stocks that are in play that a lot of traders are looking at. These are primarily going to be momentum stocks, not necessarily blue chips. These are stocks that have elevated relative volume, usually a fresh news catalyst. The things that are very currently being watched by, I would say, the majority of momentum traders, because we're all kind of looking for the same thing when we're trading momentum, right? And it tends to hit scanners all across the world. Think of this as maybe you can utilize it for that, because buying actual scanners at a professional level for trading, it's very expensive. I spend a lot of money every month on scanners. So I've added this benefit as a way to kind of add value to the existing benefits that you get for being a member at any level. So I hope you guys also find value in that. I appreciate you, and I'll see you tomorrow.